Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Ruan D. Hayden, and welcome to A Dragon's Voice. Recently on my Facebook, I was confronted with a very pertinent question by one of my patrons and close friends. And that question was, why do I always seem to focus on the works of a specific individual in my work, in my videos on Facebook, Instagram, and I decided to cover that um, in that post. Now, the post basically said that for the last 38 years being alive on this planet, we are molded and shaped by the various people that we interact with. Our social conditioning starts from birth. Now, throughout my life, I have been influenced by religious leaders of various sorts. I lived in a household that was anti witchcraft, anti Wicca, paganism, anything that wasn't Christian. And so at the ripe young age of 7, after having some very interesting um, events happen in my life, I, over time, discovered witchcraft. I discovered Wicca actually at that time. And it gave me hope in a very disruptive home. I perused the works of various authors. Some of them might ring a bell to people like me in the professional witch world. And a couple of them, as an example, is Raven Gramassi, Donald Michael Craig, Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland. And recently, after working through those books the best I could, because anytime a thing concerning magic was found in my childhood home, they were burned, they were taken, and it was pushed out of my life. I am so very thankful for the information I've gleaned from these works, practicing the practices in secret because I would get very much in trouble. I couldn't have candles, I couldn't have incense. Even my journals were not sacred, you know. And so, as I continued in the craft, and um, eventually events in my household led to being kicked out. Um, and finally, at the age of 18, I was thrust out there in the world with no money, with just me and the goddess and God, proclaimed by those very books that led to the circumstances of being homeless and kicked out. I learned very early on that these practices really brought a change in my consciousness. It helped me to view my circumstances in a healthy light. I learned that we can't own the land. I learned that even our very practices, They are shaped and molded by individual people, and when practiced, we gain our own understanding, our own practice. But we are still influenced by these people. And so, after this event, and I answered this question, I really got to thinking about how there's some people out there that will find a work from a specific author or a specific group of people, traditions, and may have the tendency towards idol worship, placing these mentors and teachers on some sort of pedestal as if they are better than the people who have read these works and have been working these practices. And so I was thinking about what led to that psychology, that people would do such. Now, my craft, my life path, is very anti-hierarchical. It is kind of removed from the concepts that we would have some sort of messianic figure or religious leader that speaks for the gods, for the spirits, and the unseen. Now, this becomes very tricky because as witches, we have our own experiences with other than human, formerly human, and other living entities in our circle of influence. And so I really got to thinking, yes, I do seem to focus on a specific author. I do focus actually on a variety of authors that have helped me shape my practice, has helped me to really begin to throw off that conditioning, that abuse. Because I've fought for 18, well, not 18 years, but I've fought since I discovered witchcraft for the freedom to live this path, to actually integrate it into my daily life without persecution, without being made to feel horrible as if my very soul was on the line. And so it may seem in my works, the stuff I post and the stuff I speak, that I am very anti-Christianity. And in a way, it's more about the view of their intolerance for other pathways. And now the problem with this, it is built into their scripture. They, basing their stuff on canon, they cannot move around this. It is integrated into the psychology. Now, I am very thankful, to be honest, that there are people out there that seem to be able to pick and choose what parts of their scripture that they will uphold and what parts that they will not, based on their own individual ideas. Of course, this could be a bad thing, as we see with the religious right and stuff like what I had to go through growing up. Then there are others who are very kind, very open, but I still believe that in their secret of hearts, it's not about being friends. There is still that drive to proselytize, to, when hearing that someone's interested, they go all zealous to explain their pathway. And this is even a stage for those who transition or begin the transition from the Abrahamic faiths. And it's difficult. It is hard. And honestly, in our very own lives, the lives of our children and our children's children, we will never be able to divorce ourselves from those psychic, not mystical, but dealing with the psyche, to toss that stuff off without replacing it with something else. And that takes time. It's not going to happen immediately. And this can bring on a lot of cognitive dissonance. It can bring in a lot of many dark nights of the soul. But it can also bring gnosis. And the gnosis I'm talking about here is what's called UVG. That is unverified personal gnosis. And these are like the aha moments, those points in time in reference to getting through that cognitive dissonance and experiencing the other end of the spectrum. Now, when we read the works of various authors and are molded and shaped in our daily lives, in our mind and our beliefs, they can be very powerful. Their words can be very enlightening. But see, it's not a new phenomenon. In fact, it harkens back way, way in the past. I mean, think of people who have embraced specific traditional practices by, and literally written by, specific authors. They are changed. They begin to cast off those things that were taught to them that they no longer wish to hold to. And they do attribute these changes to the practices that they have done, which have been garnered by thousands of authors since the early 1900s. And of course, this also goes back. Nothing comes into existence through a void. And because of that, I want to talk today about the Messiah complex. I want to talk about even the idea of the sacred king, because it's kind of tied into this idol worship that all traditions have experienced at some point in time. We all have an inner drive towards certain practices and beliefs. Some of these can be cultural. Some of these can be experience, can be, and I hate this term, revealed through those kind of interactions with entities, with the spirits, gods, ancestors. And there's nothing wrong with having these desires towards a specific pathway. It is a wonderful, wonderful journey to find our niche, to find our clique. And we all have them, whether we wish to admit it or not. There are certain interactions with specific people that create a tribal sense, which is also built into our psyche. And so it was asked by a friend why I focus on the works of this particular author. But see, the thing is, I don't refer only to the words of this author as everyone that starts to get interested in a pathway, they will accumulate so much material. It is actually one of the things that almost every mentor, um, and writer and someone who's lived the experience always tells their students, their friends, is devour as much material as you can. And the reason for this is so that you know the different paradigms and can not necessarily choose, but be drawn to a paradigm, or which in essence is your own personal paradigm, because you will draw from so many different sources. But the thing is, you can truly integrate a specific pathway, and there's nothing wrong with this. Well, let me explain where this idea of idol worship, of putting a guru on a pedestal, comes from. And it starts with the idea that the world in existence lives in a series of dispensations. Let's put it that way. And that some divine being throughout history will speak through an individual. Honestly, this is channeling. And it is one thing that is misrepresented by such things as Hollywood, by the words of the Christian priests themselves, because of course it can only be those who speak as they wish that are truly prophets. Some, including a pathway I used to follow, and mostly because of survival and other certain benefits in the LDS church, they believe that their church is led by a living prophet, and that each prophet dies, another one takes their place. And this refers, of course, back to dispensations. But the thing is that those ideas of a Messiah, a prophet that speaks for one specific entity, who demands that their people listen to the words and follow it without question. Those are the ones that have influenced the last 1500 years plus in Europe, predominantly. But as built into their scripture is, since they have the one and only true way, it is their job to personally go out there and make sure that everyone has heard about their Jesus, or their Muhammad, or even the Buddha. There are some portions of their society even that will get out there and proselytize their faith, even though it may be written into their doctrine that that shouldn't be happening. And so that also is something we find in witchcraft. A long time ago, in the dimmest recesses of our collective history, there were people who had special, powerful interactions with things that were they looked formerly human. And that's where the idea of anthropocentrism kicked in with like the major gods. And so, because their gods were humanoid, there's the idea that the gods themselves are indeed human. And these people, there are specific people who seem to be more geared towards interacting with spirits, with gods and goddesses, having psychic abilities, making pacts and promises, covenants, for lack of a better term, with these entities. In the beginning, they were really reviled because they were different. They experienced things that they told their people, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of joy. Eventually, it seemed that certain lines of people, a certain genetic or hereditary ability or a natural predilection towards experiencing such things as psychic ability, of channeling, of being able to cross the hedge through altered states of consciousness. And that it seemed to be that they were born with these abilities. As time continued, these people, well, some of them, were chosen by, or at least said that they were chosen, if written material suffices, to speak to these gods on behalf of their tribes, of their local populace. And then what happened is the people who originally spoke with these entities, they kind of were looked upon as sacred, as people to really follow and listen. Some of them became the leaders, the religious and the political leaders of their people. Now, back then, there wasn't a choice of religion. Everything was social. In fact, they molded and grew according to social necessity, political activity. This is where the idea of the sacred king came from. Now, in payment for these abilities, or for the ability to speak on behalf of these people, something had to be taken. Originally, it was sanity, it was physical differences, mental differences. They were worshipped and feared. And so, as part of these pacts, from taking from the land, as anything who needs to survive will do, they had to make a payment to those forces. And so, this person or persons were chosen through specific means to give their life for the people. They were sacred kings. And many of them were indeed looked upon as special. And over time, what happened is that some of them indeed were seen to be worshipped. This is where the Messiah complex begins. We see the stories of the Sibyl in Delphi, who would prophesy on behalf and in the names of Apollo. But see, before that, it was the mother, the great mother of us all. And she had many names. People had many experiences of these entities in these names. And that's when the political cult came in. We see the cult of Zeus, for instance. We see the cult of the house of David among the Jews. We see Muhammad, and we see the the Sangalugal of Samaria, actually, was a sacred king who spoke on behalf of the gods, supported by a priesthood that was removed from the original experiences. But the thing behind this, before this, and this is something that is embraced by non Abrahamic faiths, is the concept of the anti Messiah. And I mean this as not a person, but as that which is antithetical to the ideas of Christianity, particularly the Messiah aspect. And so we, not having an ultimate sacred leader who tells us what to do and how to do things, we have to look from a variety of sources. We have to move away from the idea that any author or teacher is anything better than, wiser than anybody else, but that their words can touch the soul in very deep, deep ways and may be a confirmation of one's own personal experiences. And so when I work through a set of material and those words inspire me and confirms my own personal experiences, this does not mean that I turn away from all the other individuals who have shaped me as a witch, but that those words do hold a lot of very wise things to contemplate and to try, to see, to experience, whether it's for you or not. And then you adapt it, because our non-Abrahamic faiths were proposed to be organic. And what I mean by that is that it's not revealed, it's not set in stone, but that it does indeed evolve within the individual. And so this individual's works does not override everything else that I've experienced. The practices, the words have indeed influenced me in very deep, deep ways, because I've had those experiences mentioned in said author's books, but also in other people's. And so when I say I am a fairy faithful, it is not because I am part of some religious group that, that puts this author on a pedestal as the one who has revealed, excuse me, my ear tickles, the one who has revealed the new old religion. Because he or she has had experiences and wish to share them, to put it out there, because he's compelled, she's compelled, they are compelled, all of the authors are compelled by the entities that they interact with, that brings it into one's mind due to the practices working, to share it with the world. In our particular religious beliefs, we would not place, like, because most of us at some point in the 90s had our first interactions with Scott Cunningham's A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, Living Wicca, Earth, Air, Fire, Water, um, and those books. We would not place Scott Cunningham as our Messiah, as our great teacher. The same goes for, like, a lot of the authors recently and stuff. They first came to Wicca and witchcraft through Silver Ravenswolf's works, but they would not place her on a pedestal because they're following their own individual paths. And likewise, I would never place one person over any other, because all interactions, every movement, thought, and word interacts with our world. Why would I shut myself off from greater experiences? There's no point, because that would limit me, and thus it would limit all my interactions. And so, because I've had these experiences through the exercises of this person, and have been influenced domestic wise, because the pathway that I focus on is very domestic. And so this domestic idea completely overrides the need for someone to intercede on one's own behalf, in the sense of making peace. Because if you don't, you'll go to hell and be punished for eternity, or no longer exist. You know, because that's one of the other Christian doctrines and stuff, is that, well, at least among a certain few paths, that in the end, after the rapture and just Jesus returns and stuff, those who turned against and never accepted Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior will burn for eternity, and or cease to be, because God would not want something that's imperfect and antithetical to him to be there at the last hurrah, the last dispensation. And so, me personally, I've had personal experiences from, and so this may bring out, if you haven't watched my previous videos, that I do and have had experiences utilizing, like, the breaching charm, as presented in Ankara Gwyn and written by Robin Artisan. But I've also had experiences working through Matt Oren's recent book, Psychic Witch. I've had experiences using those. I've had experiences since I began to study with the Temple of Witchcraft. But do I place these people as the end all of my practice, of my experience as a witch? Never. Never, 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 never. Because to do so limits the possibility of change. And that's why I decided today to say these words, to get it out there for all my viewers, that I will never be a sycophant. I will never be an apostle or a disciple of some strange cult ran by a single person or a couple people. I will never bow down to anyone. I will give respect, honor that they, whether seen or unseen, exist as a decent human being, one who has one's own strand of fate in the great web of fate. And I also know, just like how I see the visions that I have had and I have spoken about through nodes, the little parts where the strands of fate intertwine, a kind of crossroads. And that is where the basis of my recent experiences came from, is the creation, the using crossroads, whether three roads intertwined, crossroads. They are liminal spaces between the seen and the unseen. And this practice of the breaching charm, as presented in Ankaro Gwyn, has indeed given me experiences through various of his exercises. Now, exercises that would not be possible for me without said training in the Temple of Witchcraft Mystery School. The works of Matt Aron, Donald Michael Craig, Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland, Gerald Gardner, Margaret Murray, Robert Graves, Eluin Morganwig, Ruthwin Gower, and my own relatives. So does that sound like someone who has placed someone, a specific someone, as the end all of their faith? No. That means my path has organically grown, just like everything else that is truly living and has a personhood. Yeah. And so that is why I utilize the works of Claude Lecoq-Du, and I probably mispronounce that because I do not know French. I've probably, there's John Grigsby, a friend, or at least a friend on Facebook. I would love to get to know him even more. I've recently finished, for the second time, his book, Warrior of the Wasteland. My next tour is going to be his Beowulf and Grendel. His take through folklore and archaeology and anthropology on the story of Beowulf and where it ties in with Neolithic ideas. And see, that has also shaped my path. That is confirmed through my own study, utilizing those references as a starting point to confirm or deny that their words are accurate. And of course, we always know that our understanding of the human past is constantly shifting and shaping. And it is in the folklore that key pieces of information have been passed down. It is not in revealed scripts. But when we come to reading the material that's out there today, countless more than has ever been at least when I was younger and before that, there are strands of fate that led to those books. Interaction with interaction has created a butterfly effect, morphic resonance, for heaven's sake, that has allowed, and if I have to remind you of this other concept, the 99th monkey effect, that when one person teaches another a certain skill, after a certain amount of time, a message in the strand of fate that can interconnect that species, that they all end up utilizing that knowledge, even when there is no direct contact. And so, my own basic experiences, the stuff that I have had happen and have influenced, has been shared by other people that I've communicated with, by my own students, my own patrons, that I see no reason not to use whatever materials available to understand my place in the world with regards to everyone else's place in the world. And now this may be a very boring episode, and I'm sorry, but I felt it was very important for me to express these matters outside of Facebook to those who have interacted with me in some way, shape, or form. I likewise will never say that my way is the only way. I will never say that I am anyone more special than anyone else. That everyone has the capability to have these same experiences. Some may have had it occur naturally or unnaturally through some sort of trauma, which is known to be one method of bringing on these experiences. In fact, I think that maybe even my own pathway was influenced by traumatic situations. But that anyone can have these same experiences through, hopefully, softer, little safer ways, such as utilizing the information and the material that's out there. But see, the pathway that I follow, in the sense of, has actually caused experiences to happen that confirms that these exercises actually work, at least for me, and has been called by this author the ancient fairy faith, as expressed as even the title of his one of his more recent books, and Carl Gwynn, which is what I've so far utilized primarily as my topics for A Dragon's Voice, for stuff that I've come upon that kind of gives a better view of confirmation of the material presented in there. Now, I'm not an academic in the sense of I have not had the ability to really go through the folklore that is presented as specific to a culture as much as another friend or at least acquaintance on Facebook. You probably may have heard of them, and that is Morgan Daimler. Her academic views, based on years of research that led her to even learn Gaelic and to interpret the same with help of others. See, we're all interconnected. Some of it is different from my own experiences. Some of it has been pretty right on in the sense of my experiences. But see, for me personally, I look behind each individual folkloric practices. I've studied predominantly a Welsh-based path, and that is why I call myself a Welsh witch. In diaspora, of course, my own family hasn't dwelled in Wales and Cymru for many generations, but many of their loves of the homeland did filter down. Now, do I claim that it's a compact tradition of this and that? No. But how many of our grandmothers talked about their grandmothers utilizing specific cures and ointments and has been the basis of our pharmacology? How many of it actually worked? I guarantee you that most of it did. And that is why it was continued to be practiced. Do I claim to know all of what my ancestors and other Welsh witches actually practiced? Oh, hold on. My door just opened. Sorry about that. That was actually my wonderful wife coming home. They went grocery shopping and stuff. But because I call myself a Welsh witch, that doesn't mean that my interpretation of things is academically correct, but that my own experiences, the studying I have done, I'm currently learning Cymraeg. And yes, it's been difficult. But the thing is I do agree that it's very important to really get in depth in the cultural practices that you may find yourself in. And so because of that, I created a dragon's voice. A dragon's voice. Because to me, the concept of being a dragon goes back to what I understand as how dragons were, in their way, sacred kings. For individuals, they are the voice or a voice for spirits that saturate our world. Do I believe I'm the only? No, I think each and every person out there that have had their own experiences and have talked about such things as urban folklore can, like in a Mabinogi with the story of Pwyll Penanun, who literally went into Anun, went into the unseen in place of Arun, a king of that land. as a payment for breaking a very sacred taboo. One of the greatest taboos placed upon a society, in our current society specifically, is working with other than human entities. We have come to view these entities as archetypes, as personifications of um, ideas, various abstract and transcendent concepts. But for me personally, to be a voice of those spirits is to be a voice of the earth itself. And among many traditions, oh, thank you, is to lose a part of oneself through a form of altered states of consciousness, of getting into your senses, not away from your senses, but into your senses, and thus into the real experience of physicality, while recognizing that everything around us, for the most part, has a personality, has a spirit of its own. Some of these coalesce to create an ecosystem. So that's where we get the idea of the nymphs, the dryads. Even in our rituals and stuff, some of us call upon the salamanders and their kings. And it is those entities that I work with. But I would not have had the direct experience of knowing them in an intimate and personal way without the practices of the ancient fairy faith. I've had experiences beforehand, but this was more visceral, more real, and not tied with organizations and institutions and incorporated covens and stuff like that. But in a rhizomatic way. The ancient fairy faith, as presented by Robin Artisan, precludes the concept that a leader is not required, needed, or appreciated, in the sense that even he himself and every author out there would never say, to follow this path, you have to place me on a pedestal. To follow the path, you don't even have to agree with any of my material. It is the practices, the real living experience that comes from it that is the point. We do not need someone to intercede with them on our behalf. We absolutely do not need it. Every single person can practice this path, can live according to that life way, if they so choose. And so, my domestic experience, because this is a domestic faith, in the sense that you don't need to go to a church. It is preferred and more natural, and you'll get more experiences the further away from society you go. And that is because there is more life out there, away from the concrete jungle we have imprisoned ourselves within. So if there was anything I would place as more powerful than my own personal ability, it would be those very spirits, particularly in my area, particularly in your area, is where you would look. And so the only cult that I follow is my own. Because I'll tell you one thing. I know my pathway is not the only one. Nor should it be, in my opinion. Because the more diversity out there, the more diversity of belief, the more we grow as a species. The more each pathway changes. Because that is also truly natural. And so, no, Robin Artisan is not my guru. He is not the end all of my practice. Though his words have deeply touched me, he is just another author in my repertoire of my practice. And so I would like to thank each and every one of you who have decided to watch this. And I hope that this answers and lays to rest a lot of other questions that people may and concerns people may have, because my work has seemed to focus on this one person. Now on Witch Talk, actually, usually on A Dragon's Voice, I will pick out a quote. But like I said, I had to do this. Now, honestly, if you did like to have more access to the stuff I do put out, you can go to patreon.com/RuanDHayden. I put out my ideas, my experiences for my patrons, and some of those articles and links and posts and stuff like that are drawn from a lot of other sources. And so if you kind of want to see where my life seems to focus, go down there, go to patreon.com/RuanDHayden and become a patron if you so choose. Because A Dragon's Voice Ministries is sponsored by my patrons, just like you. If you wish to give to this ministry and don't want to do month by month, you can either cash at me at RuanDHayden, and you can use my dead name's email address to send through PayPal. Because though I don't believe that someone should be placed on a pedestal, I do know that due to our relationships with each other, we will always go to someone that we trust to have services done. And I mean, like, we've got our mechanic, we've got our insurance representative. We got that person that when these things happen, we need that person, or we prefer that person. My patrons have chosen me to be their witcher. And so if you would like some of those services, I do have those listed on my website at ruandhayden.com. And this was A Dragon's Voice by yours truly. May you never hunger, may you never thirst, and may you never look to someone as the end-all of your faith. May the good neighbors always bless you.